I'll tell you right here. There's a card called Caesar, Legion's Emperor, from the Fallout series or whatever in Magic. And I have been out of Magic for a while. Okay, I haven't played in a while. I was playing mono white mainly before. And for those people, saying that Star Citizen is an expensive game, I don't think you've played Magic. Okay, this game gets very expensive. And as such, I kept running into people I played with in the past, and they kept wanting me to go back and play with them. So I decided I would go and, you know, hit up the old thing. And I saw Caesar, so I decided to pick that up at the store. And I just probably spent, $500-600 or something on upgrades for it. But most of those cards aren't even going to be in the deck. So it's not really upgrades. I just spent like 600 bucks on cards for me to test out. But over this process of buying cards without thinking about what I was doing, I found quite a lot of interesting things with Caesar that I don't think people would notice. And then looking over like mono red Reddit posts, things like that online, a lot of people seem to be having issues with those decks in general. And I'm new to those colors, so I was kind of like looking at things that I could do, and I think I kind of figured out what I could do. And these are all super cheap cards for the most part. Um, to get like a basic idea of like how to do Caesar. So here's the basic concept, okay? Your black cards are going to be low cost sack a creature draw cards. There's a whole bunch of them in black that you can get that are all fairly cheap, a few cents here and there. And then your red cards will be low cost um take over target creature for a turn. Then you have low cost red cards that are 1 mana, I believe, that are it's like 1 or 2 mana that are destroy target land, and then it's the owner of the land can search out another land, basically. And then I think those might also say draw a card. So you get a land and draw a card, I think. I'm a little fuzzy. And then the other red cards that you have are uh 1 or 2 mana. Uh they give like a temporary effect, like target creature gets first strike, or all creatures get trample for 1 turn, and you draw a card. So there's a number of those. So essentially what you're looking at is you're going to have um the last part of that is there's a bunch of indestructible lands that you can buy. Um I forget exactly how many there are. Since we only have 3 colors, we don't get access to all of them, but I know there's one for each color combination, so there's 3 there. There's Darksteel Citadel, and then I think 1 or 2 more. So you probably have like 4 to 6 indestructible lands. But essentially what you're looking for is you're looking for an indestructible land to hit the field, and then you're looking to use your destroy target land cards if you run across them on your indestructible lands, which then lets you draw a card and then search out a land out of your deck to put down. And if the land is indestructible, it isn't going to destroy your land. And there's a few of them, so you have a good chance of running into it. Let's see, if you have 5, for instance, then you have like 1 in 20 cards, and then half your deck is going to be draw cards, because I didn't want to use tutors. So this deck I don't want to use tutors with. Maybe I'll slot 1 or 2 in there, but I'm not looking for tutors right now. So we're going for draws, and yeah, that's the basic gist of those 2 colors are just specifically those kind of cards. Then the white cards, basically you have situational removal. So you're going to have the exile creature and its ally gets a land, and then I'm going to have settle the wreckage, which is basically exile, attacking creatures, and you search out that many lands. Then you're gonna have a few token generators. So you want some white, like low cost white creatures. So a red and white creature, for example, is like Bard, Recruiter, Argive. You got Hazard Marshal. You got Hero of Bladehold. If you want some like recursion creatures, potentially you could do like Sun Titan. And there's a dragon that also recurs creatures. Caesar also has a card in the deck already that recurs creatures, I think, every turn. So you get a few ways to recur creatures there. And then we're trying to build the Roman Legion. So the other cards that we have are basically the Legatus, Caesar's Ace is already in there. You have the Sanguine Tribune, Vampire for a Tribune. And then if you want some like additional creatures that are kind of in that ballpark. I'm thinking the General Kellogg and the General's Enforcer, um, the Commissaire from the Warhammer. Uh, there's like Mira. There's like a Phyrexian, human Phyrexian that is controlled by Nyx, I think, is like a decent card, I believe. But I just got to thinking about this, and essentially the deck already sounds pretty decent in my head because how it would basically work is that you're going to have a bunch of dual lands and stuff anyway. I'm trying to get them to where they're not tapped. But essentially by turn 4 or whenever you get Caesar out, so I mean turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, if you get Caesar out because he's 4 mana, then you would have enough mana to cast any one of your take over target opponent's creature for a turn cards. So essentially, by the time you get Caesar out, you're going to be able to cast one of those spells, take over an opponent's creature. Then you're going to attack with it, sack it to Caesar, and get 2 legions and draw a card. So instead of having a ton of mana ramp, like we have mana in the deck and we're trying to make it more consistent, and we have artifacts and we might reduce this, but essentially what you're doing is you're taking value from your opponents and you're giving it to yourself. So for 3 mana, you can take over any creature that they summon. So they drop 6 mana on a Captain of the Watch or something. You can 3 mana, take it over, sack it. So essentially, you're using their value, their resources for yourself, and you're getting, essentially what you're getting there is you're getting a 3 mana removal card that gets through indestructible. You're getting the value of a creature, you're getting the value of a draw card, and you're getting 2 creatures for yourself for 1 life and uh, 3 mana, 2, 3 mana. I think that's pretty decent for that. If Caesar gets killed, then that's where you have the black draw cards that you sack a creature and draw cards, because then you can pay, your mana, take over an enemy creature, and then pay 2 or 3 mana, sack a creature, draw cards. So for 5, 6 mana, you're getting to destroy an enemy creature and draw however many cards, which I think is still decent for the most part. Anytime that you don't have need to draw, like you don't have a need for extra tokens, and you can just use your tokens. Like if Caesar makes a bunch of tokens, you can just sack a token, draw some cards. Since he's sacking tokens anyway, I don't think it's really gonna bother that much. The only other things that I'm really thinking about adding, the Isha, the Blade of Two Heavens or whatever, I don't know. I have it coming, but my issue with that card is that it only works on attacking triggers. So if you load up the deck with like Hazard Marshal or Hero of Bladehold or anything like that, you're going to get extra value off of it, which is good. And then potentially whatever enemy creatures that you happen to take over, you can get extra value out of, which is good. But the problem is that it requires the attack trigger. So if instead of having creatures that attack and make tokens in your deck, if you decided to run things like a New Dawn or like Horn of Gundor, things like that that produce tokens that don't really have attack triggers, then really the only thing he's going to be working on is your commander, which I don't know necessarily how good that is. However, I am a big fan of like Strionic Resignator and Lithoform Engine. Those are cards that I got into with my white decks back in the day, and I am a major fan of those because on the white decks, they would work with my commanders, they would work with like my equipments, they would work with my enter the battlefield effects, etc. But you have to, pay a little bit of mana to activate them. But those will still copy Caesar's ability. The difference there is that if you like for Caesar, for instance, a lot of people are saying to use the um there's like $20 or $30 double token cards in white now that are like 6 or 8 mana or something to cast. But if you do the Stronic Resignator and Lithoform Engine, they're like, 4 mana or something. I think you pay 2 mana and you copy an ability. Well, it's going to copy Caesar's actual ability. So if you go and you have a token and you sack the token to make 2 tokens, you get to also pay a life and draw a card, and you Lithoform that, then you get to copy that trigger, sack a creature, make 2 tokens, and draw a card again. And that's the same thing that you get with Ishan of Two Heavens, except for you don't get multiples of it. But he isn't getting multiples of it anyway. So those are 3 cards that you could use with Caesar to basically double his ability every turn. And as well, they can also copy things like Hero of Blade Hold and all those card effects as well. Draw cards and stuff, potentially, it could still work. We'll have to see. Um, and then I think I want to try and focus on the mana as much as possible in this deck. So right now I'm slotting in a bunch of mana rocks, but I don't know exactly how I'm gonna solve that issue yet. Because right now we're already gonna have a ton of draw in the deck. Like uh my creature lineup so far was already like 30 creatures before. Like it was like 20, 30 creatures before. So we might have to thin the creatures out a bit, which I have a number of those that I can kind of, get rid of. But we're already looking at needing, quite a few. Like, we don't need that many removals. And we have Catapult Master and Catapult Squad in there. And my idea basically originally was to have things like Cathar's Crusade, which would bump up my tokens and give them a whole bunch of 1/1 counters. And then kind of have like a 1/1 counter deck. But I'm thinking more and more also on Death Touch, because I had a Kingdom deck idea ages ago for Queen Marchesa with Death Touch and having a bunch of archers and stuff be my removal. And I could do a similar thing. Um, I could do a similar thing basically in the Legion deck, but I think those are kind of fighting each other. Like, I think Death Touch is probably better than 1/1 counters in general. The only thing it's not good at is killing people fast. But the 1/1 counters, for instance, like if we go up against somebody that has Death Touch, they just die. Unless I give them first strike or double strike, or I prevent the damage. Which there are cards to prevent damage, which I could add to the deck. But if I have Death Touch, because like what happens if your whole army gets wiped out? You get board wiped, and now you have to make small tokens again and build your stuff up, and you can't really defend yourself. But if you have Death Touch, your tokens could then defend you for a little while until your opponents ended up destroying your Death Touch creation, potentially. And there's, 2 or 3 cards that give all your creatures Death Touch all the time. And then there's a few cards that I think give your creatures Death Touch on attack. There's a few that basically when your creatures attack, they get Death Touch. But I'm trying to run, essentially there's a couple of equipments, and then there's a few enchantments, and then one creature basically that give your creature can block an additional creature. And I think the Tactician creature card that does that requires 1/1 counters. But essentially you would be able to have each of your tokens block 1 to 3 additional creatures when they attack you, which would be like a very solid defensive wall. Um, Now, if you have a bunch of 1/1 counters, that works very well, but also if you just had Death Touch, that would work very well because then one creature could fight and kill off a bunch of enemy creatures coming in. So it's hard to say. Like maybe I'll have Cathar's Crusade and maybe those will be like my game ending cards. Like maybe I have like Felwar's Retreat, Cathar's Crusade, and then like 2 Death Touch cards. So if my tokens get really small, I can hold on to my Death Touch and like set it on the field and buy me some time with Death Touch. I don't really know exactly how I'm planning to work all that out at the moment. The problem with the deck right now though is if you have tokens on the field, you don't have anything to fight flyers. And that's the problem. Like I can use my take over an enemy creature and then sack it thing to make tokens, but I'm only gonna have so many spells to do that with. Like if I pack 10 of those in the deck, if I take almost all of my removal and I put like 10 of those spells in the deck, that's still only 10 creatures and that's 20 tokens. I gotta end the game, before I run out of legions to send at people. But the idea from the Marchesa deck that I was going to build essentially was relying on equipments like bow and arrows, and also no, basically the Marchesa deck was relying on equipments, the bow and arrows. But with the Caesar deck, you could use things like steam catapults, a catapult squad. I think catapult squad is the best example of this, but essentially there's a bunch of creature archer cards that you can get that do like 1 to 3 damage to attacking and blocking creatures. And if you give them Death Touch, then they can just basically kill anything that comes at them as long as, I don't know, well, I don't know if that gets past hexproof because you can't target a creature with hexproof. So you might not be able to handle hexproof, but that would at least give you a way to like kill off creatures. And here's the other thing with this is that if you have a bunch of archer cards, like if you have a bunch of archers and siege equipment like that, then those are constant removal that you can be using on enemy creatures. Like if the enemy creature is like 1 power or 3 power, you can just sit there and ping it. If you have 2 or 3 archers on the field and they have like a creature that's 6 power, you could just sit there and kill it just with those alone. And then if you get the death touch cards involved, then you can just sit there and kill like 6, 7 creatures every turn. If they try to attack, you just ping all their creatures, they die, and then you can just go in with your legions and mop up. Um, and I kind of want to do that, and just have a bunch of graveyard recursion. Because if I do the death touch and I don't do anything with um 1/1 counters, or maybe I should do death touch and 1/1 counters. Because if you have death touch, they kill themselves against the enemy force. So you'd have to prevent the damage for that to not happen. And preventing the damage would take up a lot of card slots, and there's only like 2 or 3 cards that you can run to prevent the damage. But if you have both 1/1 counters and Death Touch, then if they have Indestructible, you can kill them. If they have giant creatures, then your creatures have a chance to still survive. If they have first strike or double strike, you still get to swing in and kill them as long as they don't kill you on the first hit. And the big thing is defensively, if I'm able to hold and block multiple creatures with one creature on my side, and it has Death Touch, that's a pretty good defense. Just to have like one blocker up that can like kill 3 creatures. But the thing is that the prevent damage cards usually you have to be attacking, so it isn't going to work with blocking anyway. And indestructible you could potentially do, but there's not that many cards that give all your creatures indestructible like that. Like you have things that give your commander indestructible, but not really your defensive tokens. And then that many tokens is already going to be hard to give all indestructible with anyway. So you have like Eldrazi Monument, and that's about it. But if they have 1/1 counters, then they're thick and they can still do death touch. Which, okay, that seems better to me. So let's say I have 3 cards that allow me to have my tokens block additional creatures, and then I have 3 cards that give me 1/1 counters, and I have 3 cards that give me death touch. If I run across, that'll give me 6 cards that are basically my power cards from my tokens. Because if they have death touch, people aren't going to want to block or attack them anyway. And if they're big, people aren't going to want to get hit by it. So you kind of have that toss up. And then with some of those draw cards from red, one of them I know is like 1 mana draw card, and it gives your creatures trample for 1 turn. So if I'm able to have, a couple of things, I think there's also the General's Enforcer, or there's somebody in the deck that gives your creatures trample, haste, and vigilance, I think. So you would have like 2 or 3 cards in there that could just let your guys run over the top of an enemy if they had a bunch of 1/1 counters anyway. The thing is with this is I don't know how many archer type cards that you could slot in. I don't think I would want to do bow equipment. Um, because if you use a bow equipment, I mean I guess I could. I could get all the bows and all the archers. Because if the archers get 1/1 counters, they just get 1/1 counters. It's not that big of a deal. Um, the big thing is that you're going to be able to kill things without having to touch them if they have death touch. And then if you don't have death touch, if they get 1/1 counters, they're still going to be soldiers that you can fight with. So we'll just have to see how much kind of deck space that we're dealing with. But this in general, I think, is just a decent idea if you want to play Caesar. Going into this, I kind of looked at a bunch of cards and possibilities, and then I just, it doesn't seem like Mardu has very strong mana ramp, which is the same problem that White has or had. And the only way that I could get around that in White was to really focus on equipment and drawing lands out of the deck as quickly as possible. And if I do that with the Caesar deck, if I do that with Caesar, basically I'm gonna have a ton of creatures, and like you need the creatures that draw lands, you need the search cards, which you'd have access to all the search cards you want, but you need the creatures that draw lands out, you need the search cards that pull out the equipment. So you're gonna have to have equipment slotted in, at least 2 to 3 that draw lands. In case someone destroys one, you probably want at least 2. Me, I'd probably run 3, so you get a couple of color protections, and then you'd have like a Sword of the Amethyst, or you get just 3 swords with 3 different color protections. And then you're gonna need your search cards, your general creatures that draw lands and stuff like that. So I think instead, with Caesar's ability, since he's able to sack a creature and then activate his ability, as long as I'm able to sack my enemy's creatures, it makes up for me not having enough mana. Because like if they have 10 mana and they summon an Eldrazi, or they summon like a Blightsteel Colossus or something, all I have to do is take it and then sack it real quick, and it's pretty much done. And if they kill Caesar, then I can just take it and then use a black draw card to sack it, and it puts them back. And as long as that happens, I can slowly build up my mana pool. Just 1 mana rock, just keep going. And really, I don't think, like, once the deck gets to like 6 mana, you're probably pretty good. Like with 6 mana, you can play most of the cards in the deck. So far that I've put in. So there's not a whole lot that you'd be missing out on. Hard to say. And then the other card is and there's a lot of burn cards that you can use with Caesar, but I don't really like burn in my decks because it just seems wimpy to me. Like, there's a ton of burn cards. Like I have 2 or 3 cards that can burn if I have a Legion there, but I don't like those little incremental burns. So Legate Lania Caesar's Ace is a 4-mana 2/2. People have to sack a tenth of their creatures rounded up, and then when an opponent sacks a creature, you put a 1/1 counter on it. He's probably the weakest link in this deck, but if you put him down in our games, we do games with 4 people, I believe. So he would be able to just come in and get 3 counters. So he's going to be 4-mana 5/5, potentially more depending on how many creatures they have, which is fine by me for the most part. But if I can get him more 1/1 counters, that matters. The only things that I can really run to give him more utilities like Dictate of Erebos. But the question is, how many sack cards do you have that you can force somebody to sacrifice their creature with? Because I know Dictate of Erebos, I know there's a few white cards that let you like pick one creature and then everyone sacrifices everything else. And those kind of cards would be very, very good on him. Like he's a commander that wants you to. The way I would see using him is like a win con card. Like you would have him in the command zone. You would kind of play whatever, and then you would end up getting like, was it like I think tragic arrogance or cataclysmic gearhulk or whatever. Those things that like let you pick one card and stack everything else. So then you would put him down on the ground, and then you would take one of those cards. You would pick him as someone that you would save, and everyone else would sack everything else. And then all of a sudden he would become like a 20/20, and you get to swing in and kill everybody. That's probably the best way I could think about using that guy, but I think he's missing a color if I recall correctly. Yeah, he doesn't have access to white. So you would have to have a lot of black cards that make people sack. Anyway, he's going to stay in the deck though because he's a Legatus. Trying to make the Roman military. My problem is that building the deck, I don't know if I want every token to be one individual legion that would include archers and everything else, or do I separate things like, do my archer units count as, do I put archers in the deck to defend against air creatures and then they just have an absurd amount of archers in that legion? Or do I, for instance, just have things like Hero of Bladehold that produce more tokens and more legions as they, fight? I figure just focusing on the ground value would probably be the best for now anyway. Um, I like the recurring removal because like if I can get catapult squad and some archers down on the field or even a couple of like equipment onto some legions, then it just gives them more utility in general. So like I just need the death touch, get 1/1 counters, death touch, block multiple creatures, tap your creature to instantly kill something. I think that's a lot of value, but the deck space is going to be where it is because I think there's like 4 or 5 bow equipments that you can get. Then you have Thornbite Staff, and then you have a number of archer creatures that you can put in a deck, and I think most of those are white creatures. And then if you give them Death Touch, then any creature that you equip those on, or any archer that you use, they tap for 1 damage to kill a target. And so the Death Touch will proc and kill anybody that they hit with that. So, kind of a big deal, but it also requires a decent amount of space. Like, I would need probably 10 cards that I could slot in just for that. So you'd have like 10 archers, you would have 10 take target opponent cards, and then you'd have like 10 black draw cards. So that's already 30 cards. 10 ramp cards, 30. So you might have like 10 creature slots. And I'm not sure. I mean, it fits, but I don't know how good that is, because a lot of the red cards are going to have card draw on them anyway. Is what I'm planning. So all the black cards are going to draw me 1 to 2 cards. So if I have 10 of them, that's anywhere from 10 to 20 cards just there, which is a fifth of my deck. And then the red cards, I think there's like 5 or 6 of them. They draw me 1 card. So I'd have enough card draw for like 20, 25 cards maybe. So I'd be able to get like a fourth of my deck just from draws. And then the commander draws a card each turn, or each time I can proc it, you know. So I'm looking at being able to draw like half my deck probably as I go through it. And then any lands that I get out of the deck is just a bonus on top of that. But if I can slot in archers or not is going to be the big deal. And the Death Touch is just probably a bit much. But overall, I think that's like the general plan. If you were to try and make the deck, yeah, I'm gonna try to make it and test out a few things in a couple weeks. I don't have the archers or anything like that, but I've bought a number of cards and flavor cards as well. Like I bought like arena favorites, I think it was, or crowd favorites, which is like a 7-drop white gladiator creature card just because it was Roman themed. And probably shouldn't keep it in the deck, but I was wanting to try and fit some gladiators into the deck. So that's just me wasting money, which is how I spent so much on these. Probably won't use that card. I'm going to remove all the gladiator themes and everything else out, so that'll free up, 3, 4, 5 slots. I think there's a Shadow Cat that I was going to put in for a gladiator thing. Let's see if I can find it real quick. I don't remember what it does. Skyclaw Shadow Cat was basically, my magic version of a lion is one thing I was planning on. So 3 mana and a black cat horror creature. Pay 1 and a black, sacrifice another creature, you put a 1/1 counter on Skyclave Shadowcat. And then whenever a creature you control dies with a 1/1 counter, or dies, you draw a card. Still a lot of utility, so I might keep it around, but it does require me to have somebody that dies. But if I say use that with Caesar, for instance, I have a 1/1 counter on a creature, I sack it, I get 2 more tokens, I draw a card with Caesar, I draw 2 cards with the Shadow Cat. Potentially could be good, but early game it's not going to be that amazing, I don't think. And kind of hard to say. If I get rid of my gladiator cards, and maybe I should just get rid of the cat as well, but I still plan on having like Felwar Retreat in there, which can put 1/1 counters on everything or make cat tokens. Crowd favorites was the gladiators that I was gonna put, and then I was gonna make a gladiator token creature card at one point. And then I think who was the other guy? Grimwald or whatever was his name, was gonna be like my the Shadow of Death from like Spartacus. He just looks like a dude with like weapons attached to his arms, and I think it was like seven mana or 8 mana, and you could pay like 7 life and draw 7 cards. So that was pretty interesting. Crowd Favorites actually wasn't even like a terrible card. It's just not super good. It was like 6 or 7 mana, I think, for like a 5/5 or like a something like that, like gladiator creature. And then you could pay like 4 mana and tap an enemy creature, or you could pay like 5 mana and boost its defense up by like 5. So I don't know. But I'm gonna hop off right now. I gotta get some more work done. Y'all